Fanfiction. I love fanfiction. And if you clicked on this video, chances are you also love fanfiction. Or you at least know what it is, okay? And today I want to talk about My Chemical Romance fanfiction. Specifically, the most popular, most famous My Chemical Romance fanfiction, Unholyverse. And yes, I do have a physical copy of it that my good friend gave to me. It's very beautiful. It's just the first part, but this is just about the first part. That's what I want to focus on today, which the first part of Unholy Verse is called I Have Been All Things Unholy. Hi, I'm Olive. This is actually my second channel, and this is the first time I'm doing this kind of video ever. So this is really fun and exciting for me. I've never done like a formal kind of review, sort of like analyzing sort of thing about a really special topic to me. And if you think I'm funny and stuff, then you should also check out my other channel, which is really where I kind of do second channel things. I just do like random stuff. But we're going to try this out on this channel too. So, yeah. Thanks. Thanks for clicking and thanks for like coming in and stuff. So, let's get into this shit, okay? So, Unholyverse is a 5-part fan fiction series that was posted to Archive of Our Own by the author that goes by Bexless in 2011. Although I'm pretty sure it existed before then on LiveJournal. I just couldn't find proof of that, but I'm very certain it existed before people like commonly used AO3 for their fan fictions. People were posting on LiveJournal a lot for their fics, especially MCR fics. Anyway, and the description for the series reads: religion, horror, exorcisms, piercings, and Gerard is a priest. And really, there's never been a more accurate description ever. It could probably use the word tattoos too. I would say tattoos are a pretty important part of it too. But that is a really accurate description. So let's just get into it. Let's talk about what this is all about. So, like I said, we're just gonna focus on the first part today. Might talk about the other parts some other time, but right now we're just gonna focus on I've been all things unholy. So the description just for this first part of the fic reads: he thinks I have stigmata, Frank said, because what the fucking hell? It couldn't get any worse. He might as well just lay it out. Oh well, said Brian into his hands. Of course. So, yeah. I'll be honest, when I first read that description, I was like, what is this about? Like, I don't understand. I don't even know what stigmata is. Like, what is this? Why is Gerard a priest? But it was intriguing nonetheless. And really, I read it because everyone had such raving reviews about it. So that's what made me so curious. Um, but that description is a little, I don't want to say misleading, but it doesn't really tell you what you're getting into. So let me tell you what you are getting into. So just part 1 is based off of a movie called Stigmata, which I did watch, and we'll talk about it a little bit, but honestly, it's very loosely based off the movie. It's really just like the plot of the movie, kind of like, but with if it was happening to MCR, that's kind of it. The movie isn't, it's okay. It's okay. Anyway, we'll talk about it later. And now I'm going to kind of go over like the plot of what happens in it. And kind of like give you my thoughts on like everything that happens in it. So spoilers, obviously. I do recommend you read it for yourself and try it out, or watch some of this video, and if it sounds interesting, like stop and go read it. But if you don't have the patience for that, because it is pretty long, if you're not really into long fan fictions, especially if you're gonna planning to read every single part, it's a kind of a lot to read. If you don't have the patience for that, then I'll just tell you everything. So, and by the way, there is Ferrard in this fan fiction. It is a Ferrard fic. But um and low key, high key, low key, I don't really play about Ferrard. So if you're not into that, if you're not into RPF either, which stands for real person fiction, if you weren't aware, then you should probably go now. This is your last warning because we're gonna get into the Ferrard. Okay. Okay. So Frank Ayuro of My Chemical Romance is our main character for this story. And also, I'm assuming if you're watching this, you already know who My Chemical Romance is. I'm not gonna explain that to you. I'm not woman-splaining MCR to you. You know who they are. So Frank is the main character, and he is very much the main character. Like it's like how he is kind of in real life. It's like how do all these things like just happen to you? You know, like how did you just end up joining your favorite band and why do you get to kiss Gerard on stage, you know? So very main character energy. It's Frank's world. We're just living in it. So, yeah. And we just jump straight into things starting off. Frank is getting a tattoo by some random guy named Luke, who is an original character, not based off a guy in a band. There are other guys in bands, but not in the first part. So well, actually, never mind. We'll worry about that later. So he's getting this tattoo and he's just lamenting about everything that is going wrong in his life, as one does with their tattoo artist or their hairdresser or anything. He's just like, oh, everything just sucks for me right now. And through this little piece of exposition, we're learning that Frank is a body piercer at a kind of salon type place. They do more than one thing. They have and this place is owned by Brian Schechter. So if you don't know who that is a real person who wasn't in MCR, but he was MCR's manager for quite a bit. And I believe as of now, they are still working with him, which is cool. So if you're not really sure who he is, then I recommend watching Life on the Murder Scene because you actually get to hear Brian talk about the band and stuff. Not that you need to like do your homework before you read this fan fiction though, because you don't really need to know anything about Brian to know anything about his character. He's just like the manager guy, but he is also like Frank's friend. So Frank is saying that God really has it out for him. He's just been life has just been sucking for Frank right now, okay? So here's kind of what he's talking about. He says, "You know what it is?" Frank said, watching Luke prep his needle. "What it is that God hates me." "God gave you food poisoning?" Frank shrugged, felt the cracked leather of the chair scraping through his shirt. "Why not? Maybe he has more important shit to do than curse your guts. Ever think of that? He's got more important shit to do than taking care of my fucking life, that's for damn sure." The food poisoning, as Frank had already explained to Luke, was just the start of it. If he hadn't had food poisoning, he wouldn't have had to take time off work, and he wouldn't have gotten two messages from Brian talking about how disappointed he was that Frank hadn't taken their discussion about his absenteeism, it's a weird word, seriously. And he wouldn't have forced himself back into work early, and he wouldn't have had to run off in the middle of piercing Darren Haywood's scrotum to throw up. And Darren Haywood's lawyers wouldn't have sent Brian a nice letter to say they were being slapped with a lawsuit because Darren Haywood's pierced scrotum had ballooned with infection and it was apparently leaking pus. Okay. So that's just like a that's like glimpse of what's going on in his life right now. And what's more, if that wasn't bad enough, you know what else is going on in Frank's life? He came home from work recently and his door was busted down and someone had stolen his guitar and his TV and his dog was missing. Very sad, very sad. And when he went to go look for her, his car got towed. So he doesn't have shit right now. And that's how he ended up here. So Frank is obviously really going through it right now. And Luke is just like, I hear your brother. But what he doesn't tell Luke is that he was just wandering around trying to find his dog and after losing his car. And that's when he came across a tattoo shop and he saw all these drawings in the window and he saw this one drawing of a woman with wings, some sort of angel thing, and he was just drawn to it. Something inside him was compelling to go in without an appointment and just ask for this tattoo. Some divine intervention. And this whole experience just has him spilling his guts to this random man, okay? So Luke, tattoo guy, finishes the just drawing the tattoo on him. And then he's about to start tattooing it when he's all like, shh, it'll be easier if you're quiet. And Frank is already so relaxed and just like into it. And he's like, okay. And then he falls asleep while getting a tattoo, which is really interesting. And when he wakes up, he's even like, whoa, who the fuck falls asleep during a tattoo? And then he looks at the finished product and he's like, she's beautiful. It was the wings Frank had liked, her tattered wings, one out to each side and two stretched out above her head, two more twined downwards like legs. She was like a woman, Frank thought, a woman laying back on a bed before, no, after sex. Everything on display except there was no body, just the wings and her face, which was sad somehow, despite not actually having any features. Sad and beautiful. She was just as good as she'd looked in the window. Better because now she was Frank's. Okay, okay. So we're gonna flash forward a little bit now. And now we're at Frank's job, and he's showing off his new tattoo to the dismay of his coworkers, who the place is owned by Brian, and the people who work there are Frank, Mikey, Ray, and Bob. Yes, Bob is there because this was a long time ago. Just pretend like he's someone else or something. Pretend he's um no, wait. Pretend he's Tucker Rule. Pretend that was the drummer in MCR all along, and that'll make you feel better. Just pretend it's him instead. But I'm gonna be saying Bob, but just imagine Tucker in your mind and you'll feel way better. So, anyway. So, Frank is their piercer, Bob is the tattoo artist, Ray is a hairdresser, and Mikey is just like the receptionist, but he literally doesn't do shit. He doesn't answer the phone. All he does is just like text on his phone all day, and he just like keeps track of all the appointments in his mind. And Brian mentions I think a few times in the story about how like he wishes he could like get Mikey to do something, but also he's what's getting customers to come in. So he lets him keep his job, which is really really funny. So he's showing off his tattoo, and they're all like, wow, I can't believe you went to some stranger to get a tattoo. You like have a tattoo artist who's your friend. Like, how dare you? And they're like, also, why does it smell weird? Your tattoo freaking smells weird. It's on his hand, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's important. And he tells them that Luke gave him this weird goo. It's in some unmarked jar to put on his tattoo to like make it feel better. And they're like, okay, that's weird, but whatever. And they just go on there with their day. And then when Frank gets home, he's so sad his little dog isn't running around. So he prints out some flyers and he puts them all around. And for the first of many, he notices his wrists are kind of aching. Like, like you've been doing a lot of stuff, like kind of achy feeling. Okay. He just chalks it up to, putting too much pressure on his hands when he's putting up the posters. Like, sure, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But when he wakes up the next day, they're still hurting. And when he puts some of this mystery goo that Luke gave him on the tattoo, he notices it makes the pain hurt less. So he puts it on both of his wrists. And now he's back into work, and Frank has been really wanting to be trained to be a tattoo artist too. But Bob is always like, no. But then Bob finally agrees, and Frank is like, oh my god, yay! And so he goes to tell Mikey, who is mysteriously talking on the phone to someone who is like making him happy. And Frank's like, who the fuck is that? But then he gets over it, and then he shares some news with Mikey. He's like, I'm gonna get trained on tattoos, and Mikey's happy for him, but he warns him to be fucking good because remember, they're facing a lawsuit, a whole lawsuit, because some dude's balls got infected after Frank pierced them. And Frank has to tell him, like, man, I pierced them exactly right. I did not breach the inner scrotum, whatever that means. And I don't know anything about piercings or balls, but that sounds bad if that happened. But he's like, I did not. I did not do that. I will pierce your balls right now. I did not do that. So later, Frank's wrists are hurting again. And when Brian sees him taking some pain medicine for it, he's like, don't tell me you're sick. Because, fun fact about Frank Hero, this is a real life thing too. He's just like chronically sick all the time. and that's not good, if you have a job. So it's okay because Frank lies and he's like, I'm fine. And then Brian brings up the lawsuit, and Frank has to repeat he did not breach the inner scrotum. He knows he did it. But apparently, the Darren guy, the ball sack guy, he wants Frank fired for this shit, okay? And Brian is telling Frank, like, stay away from this guy. Like, we don't need, like, him having any other reason to hate you or something like that. Like, it could be really bad if we end up getting sued. And Frank's like, yeah, I'm joking around. He's like, yeah, I'm gonna blow up his balls or something like that. And Brian is like, God damn it, Frank! This isn't a joke! Who else is gonna pay Mikey to sit on the and text on his phone all day and not do anything? You want him to lose his job? And Frank's like, no, no. So he yells at him. He has to be the mean boss, but it's for the best. He makes sure Frank's taking this shit seriously. He's like, okay, okay. Now he's got some time to kill before his next appointment is supposed to come in. So Ray is like, oh my gosh, let me trim your hair. You need a haircut. And this is when we learn that Ray makes like his own hair products. And they're basically like potions kind of. It's just like a mixture of stuff, and they're all named after like Iron Maiden songs or something like that. And this is also how we find out that Mikey comes into work early every single day to get his hair straightened by Ray. And I definitely did not catch this the first time I was reading this because I was not focused on that. But this is actually foreshadowing because in the later editions of Unholyverse, the like secondary couple is actually Ray and Mikey, which I did not see coming, even though it's literally tagged. I like did not see it coming. Um, Reiki is the ship. I prefer to say Reiki for the ship name. Doesn't matter. That's the secondary ship. That was kind of like foreshadowing to that. I didn't pick up on that, to be honest. So Ray is just like finishing up, giving Frank a little trim, a little haircut, when suddenly Ray was just taking Frank's cape off when Mikey gave a sudden squawk, sorry, launched himself off the counter or ran out of the door. The hell? Said Bob, looking up. Mikey returned a minute later, tangled up with a dark haired dude in a long black coat and like 9 scarves. Motherfucker, he was saying. He was saying with his mouth mashed up against the dude's cheek, don't you ever leave me for that long again. The dude laughed and hugged Mikey closer. I missed you too. They stood there cuddling and giggling for like 100 years. Frank raised his eyebrows at Ray in the mirror, but Ray wasn't looking. He was exchanging boggled expressions with Bob. Eventually, Brian, who had slipped out of the back room at some point, cleared his throat and said, Mikey, I like to think of myself as a being pretty relaxed when it comes to your workday schedule, but I really think some things are best confined to the Oh, Mikey said, distangling himself finally. Gee, this is my boss, Brian, and that's Bob and Ray and Frank. He pointed to each of them in turn, then slung his arm back around the dude's neck. Guys, this is my big brother Gerard. Hello, said Gerard, waving shyly. I don't hang on my brothers like that, Ray murmured to Frank as he got up from the chair. For real, Frank agreed, even though we didn't have any brothers. He offered Gerard his best smile and his hand to shake. Hey man, good to meet you. Mikey's told us exactly nothing about you. Gerard smiled back and started to say something, but then stopped and took Frank's hand. There was a sudden, marked, blessed drop in the pain of Frank's wrists. It was all Frank could do not to yelp out loud. It was so sudden. Gerard turned Frank's hand over and bent down to inspect the back of it. Gerard turned Frank's hand over and bent down to inspect the back of it. Interesting tattoo. Thanks, Frank said, shooting Bob a look that said, see? Brian and Bob both rolled their eyes. I just got her a couple days ago. Do you know what it is? Said Frank. Gerard's hands were really warm, and the longer he touched Frank, the less Frank's wrist hurt. It couldn't be real, Frank thought. It must be a brain trick of some kind. Serotonin from a sexual attraction distracting him or something. Gerard was pretty cute after all. An angel? It's a seraph, Gerard said, looking up at Frank from under his bangs. One of the seraphim, the highest choir of angels. I knew I'd seen it somewhere before, Mikey said. Gee, come on, let me show you around. Okay, Gerard said. He straightened up, waited for a second, then said, oh. Frank let go of his hand, fucking hell, and stepped back laughing. Sorry. It's okay, Gerard said, smiling again. Frank's stomach flipped right over and the pain flooded back into his wrists. Mikey dragged his brother off to the other side of the shop, and Ray looked down at Frank's hand, frowning. Dude, that's so weird. Ray looked at Bob and said, Yo, come check this out. What? Frank looked down at his hand too. Oh, it's healed, Bob said, holding Frank's hand up and inspecting it. How can it be healed? It can't be, Frank said. I just got it it can't be. It didn't even scab yet. Bob ran his palm over the tattoo, frowning. What the fuck is in that shit you're putting on it, Frank? Frank shook his head, trying not to flinch or wince at the pain every time Bob turned his hand over or back again. I don't know. It wasn't healed this morning. Bob raised his eyebrows. It wasn't! Frank pulled his hand away and hid it behind his back, like that would make it less weird. Maybe he used a special needle. I don't know. A special needle, Ray said flatly. Frank gave him the finger with his free hand. Bob was still frowning. This is too weird. What's weird is a tattoo artist with no ink, Frank shot back. You're a freak of nature, Briar. Don't go pointing fingers. He went back to his room, vaguely aware of Mikey saying his brother was leaving. Frank was too busy staring at his hand to say goodbye. It couldn't be healed already. It couldn't. But it was. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm not really sure. Obviously, Mikey and Gerard are very close brothers. That's like a fact we all know, closer than like most brothers. The kind of almost incest joke was kind of not cool. Didn't I don't really like those kind of jokes. But you'll notice there's like an instant connection between Frank and Gerard. His wrists are are suddenly healed whenever Gerard is touching him. His tattoo gets instantly healed and the pain in his wrists goes away. But as soon as he walks away, the pain returns. Interesting. So it's a new day, and the pain in Frank's wrist is becoming unbearable. So much so that he's not going to be able to work. And Brian is like, Are you kidding? But Frank's like, Bruh, I don't have health care. And that's your fault because you're my employer. So Bob drops Frank off at a free clinic, and Mikey comes along just to keep him company because he's such a good friend. I'll drive you, Bob said. Mikey rode along and Bob dropped them off. He offered to cancel his afternoon appointment, but Mikey said, No, the guy's leaving for Africa next week and your book's solid. You need anything? He asked when he filled in Frank's form for him and they were getting settled in amongst the drunks and the bums for the inevitable year-long wait. Your brother, Frank said without thinking. And then wanted to bite out his own tongue. What the fuck was he supposed to say next? Your brother's hands have magical healing qualities, and if my wrists don't stop hurting soon, I'm going to break down and cry? Mikey didn't even look surprised. He just sighed and said, Dude, there's something you need to know about Gerard. He's. Jesus Christ, said a voice, and Frank looked up to see if him. Just realized how that dialogue goes. That's funny. Frank looked up to see a familiar face staring down at him with an equally familiar look of exasperation. Frank, what the fuck? I thought we agreed I wouldn't have to see your face for at least a month. Frank smiled weakly. Hi, Dr. Durning. So they talk to the doctor who is very familiar with Frank. He comes to this clinic a lot. And Mikey starts telling the doctor what's been happening with Frank in his life lately. Has been not good. And how he got this new tattoo and tells him about the mystery goo too. And the doctor's like, What the fuck is this shit? Like, I'm gonna test it in a lab because this is weird and you shouldn't just let some random guy give you something to put on your skin. So the doctor just tells him to take some freaking Tylenol and to just get over it. But Frank is like, please, please, please. So he prescribes him 2 days worth of Vicodin, which honestly he probably shouldn't have even done that. But he was in a lot of pain, so he deserves it. So Frank and Mikey go back to Frank's apartment, and I realized this when I was writing the script. I was like, wait, if Bob dropped them off at the clinic, how did they get back to Frank's apartment by themselves? Let's just assume they took some form of public transportation, or maybe it was in walking distance. Okay, we don't know. Whatever. Suspend your disbelief. Mikey makes Frank lay down in bed and take a Vicodin, and Mikey lays next to him and puts his arm around him. And I swear to God, if this wasn't tagged as a Ferrard fic, I would honestly think it's a Frankie fic. Like they're really close. But Mikey's just a really good friend, okay? And then I just have to read to you what happens next because I don't really know. I don't really know how to describe this. Thanks for staying, Frank slurred. Hey, what did you want to tell me about? There was a split-second pause between the impact and the pain, like getting hit with something heavy. All the breath knocking out of him, and then all the air rushed back into his lungs, and his back was on fire. What the fuck? He choked out, and then he couldn't talk anymore because he was screaming. The blows came one after the other, never enough time between them for Frank to get his breath. He could barely breathe anyway. There was something on the back of his head, someone holding him down. He could feel their fingers digging into his scalp, keeping him there, pushing his face deep into the mattress. The pain was like nothing Frank had ever felt before, not coming from inside him, but deep down onto him, heavy and sharp and so big, striking him from shoulders to knees, up and down, again and again and again. He tried to turn over, trying to get enough purchase in the sheets to pull himself away, to get away from it, but there was that hand on his head and his wrists were tied. He could feel it now, feel the rope cutting into his flesh whenever he twisted and pulled and tried to get free. He could hear Mikey, hear him yelling Frank's name, and Frank thought, shit, shit, Mikey, get out of here. But then another blow fell between his shoulder blades, and he felt the skin tear with a bright, wet flash, like being slit open with a knife and peeled. It didn't stop. It still didn't stop. He was bleeding and they were still beating him. They were going to take off his fucking skin. The pain wasn't like a wave or like anything he'd ever read about. It was just constant. It just went on and on and on. He was drowning in it. It was filling up his nose and ears and mouth and getting inside him. He could feel it everywhere. There was nowhere to go. He tried to call out, tried to beg for them to stop, but his voice was muffled by the mattress and clogged with tears, his throat hoarse from screaming, and the noises he could make were lost under these sounds he could hear, these sounds like hundreds of people murmuring to each other. How can they watch this? He thought. And then they hate me. And then a blow fell with a sick, sharp thud right under his ear, and he felt the darkness rushing up to meet him and fell gratefully inside. When he woke up, it was to Mikey's face, white and tear stained and striped all down one side with blood. Shit, Frank croaked, his throat dry and raw. Mikey, did they hurt you? Did they hurt you? Mikey shook his head. He was holding Frank's hand. Are they gone? Frank managed, carefully not looking at the red sheets under his arm. They were white before. Mikey shook his head again. His mouth was pressed into a tight, pale line, like he was trying not to throw up or cry out or something. Frank took a few deep, slow breaths, fighting his own battle not to throw up all over the bed. Mikey, what is it? Are they still here? Who was it? It wasn't anyone, Mikey said eventually in a tiny voice Frank could barely hear. Frankie, it wasn't anyone. What do you mean? There was nobody here, Mikey said, his voice cracking. It was you were screaming and you were jerking around everywhere and then you were bleeding and there was nobody here. There was silence for a few minutes. The blood in Frank's veins pulsed in time with the hot, sick throb of his back. So, Frank just got magically attacked by invisible men, forcibly held down and whipped basically, and Mikey just witnessed the whole thing happen and there was nobody there. And there's blood everywhere, but here's the really weird part. He's fine. Frank is fine. He has these wounds on his back, but they've already closed. Somehow there is blood all over the room, but Frank is no longer bleeding. And they're not just closed wounds now, they're healed wounds. So he's just like fine. And if you're like me, when you got to this aspect of the story, you were probably like, okay, what the actual fuck is happening? What do you mean? Like, what's happening? But you have to trust the process. You have to trust the process. Just keep waiting, okay? So Mikey helps Frank shower and inspects him and confirms all of his wounds are healed. Sadly, the tattoos on his back are all fucked up now because he's covered in scars. And Frank has to look at his own back and through the, looking at another mirror. He's like, man. Mikey is quick to point out that these wounds healed suddenly quickly, just like his tattoo. Like, he's like, you should literally be dead right now. This is like weird as fuck. Like, okay, you're gonna stay at my place tonight. And now we're back at work again. Nobody knows about this weird instance that just happened. Frank is in a lot of pain because these scars are healed, but he's still fresh scars and they're killing him and he can't just call out call out of work because invisible men whipped him. That's not gonna fly. So Brian comes over and he's like, Frank, glad to see you back. And he slaps him on the freaking back. And he's like, and Mikey gets him some pain meds. And Ray is like, what the fuck is going on? Frank looks terrible right now. And they're like, don't worry about it. It's fine. It's fine. So Ray's like, bitch, let's go to the club tonight. You deserve it. So they go to the club, and Frank's already been drinking a bit, and Mikey is very worried about him. But Frank is having a good time. Okay, he dances on a fucking podium. Okay, and they meet this girl, and we never learn her name, but she is like, she's trying to fuck Mikey. She's like all over him. And all we really know about her is that she has like an accent, which I always imagined as like a Russian accent. But like there is like the typography, for like a specific accent, but I just don't know what it is. And right now she's not very important, but she's gonna come back later. So just remember, girl with an accent trying to fuck Mikey, okay? And then Frank realizes, like, oh, Mikey's right. I am way too drunk. So he goes to piss and sober up when someone freaking grabs him and pulls him outside into the alley. And these little skinheads are like pushing him against the wall, and he's like, what the fuck's happening? And one of them is like, you fucked up my friend's balls. And Frank is like, oh, fuck. And two of them grab him so the other guy can hit him. And Frank's like, guys, violence is not the answer. And the guy's like, our buddy's lawyer is gonna take all your money, and then we're whoosh, flips out a little pocket knife, gonna take your balls. And he's like, ah! Hold him, the skinhead ordered, and he was reaching for Frank when the entire world went white, and Frank's head was filled with blinding pain. He was dimly aware of his body arching and twisting, of them letting him go and letting him fall heavily to the ground. Mostly the only thing he knew was the pain, though, the sharp points of pain driving themselves into his scalp. Something heavy hit the back of his head, and the needles, they were needles, Frank realized. He knew what it felt like to have sharp things rammed into your flesh. Around his head, drove in further, making Frank grab at his head and try to pull them away, pull them off. But someone, the guys in the alley, what were they doing to him? Grabbed to them and held them down, and the heavy thing hit him again, and the needles scraped further down inside his skin against his skull. He could feel them snapping and embedding inside him. Warmth ran down his face, warmth and wetness, blood, Frank thought dimly, and bleeding again, and dripped into his open mouth. There were those sounds again, the murmuring crowd. But this time there was laughter, too, and someone was calling him names. It wasn't English. He couldn't understand them, and he tried to tell them that. Tell them he couldn't understand why they were so angry, but whatever it was, he was sorry. He just wanted them to stop. And then someone was shaking him and pulling him up, cradling and saying his name over and over and over again. Frankie, Frankie, come on, wake up! Frank opened his eyes blearily, blinking blood away and squinting onto Mikey's face. What? He said thickly. Over Mikey's shoulder there was movement, and Frank realized it was Bob and Ray and some guys he didn't recognize, security maybe, and that the guys who jumped Frank were pretty much on the floor. Don't, he tried, and had to turn his head to the side and cough out a mouthful of blood before he could carry on. Don't hurt them. What? Bob stared at him crazily. Frankie, you. Because of the case, Frank said, letting his head fall back again. Mikey hugged him close. Brian said I gotta keep my nose clean. Fuck Brian, fuck your nose. Bob had his knee in the middle of the skinhead's back and his arm twisted up behind him. You look like roadkill, Frank. What did they do? Try to rip off your face and wear it as a mask? It wasn't us, the skinhead said, and then screamed when Bob said something twisty with his wrist. Shut the fuck up, Bob said grimly. I will pound you into the fucking floor. It wasn't us, one of the other guys repeated, a security guy's big hand fisting in his jacket. He looked terrified. I mean, we were gonna. Shut your fucking mouth, said the skinhead, and then Bob made him scream again. But then he was just screaming and bleeding and shit, the other guy continued, looking at the third guy for confirmation, Frank guessed. But the third guy looked so freaked out he was practically rocking back and forth. But it wasn't us, I swear to God. Ray looked over at Frank. Frankie? Was it them? Frank looked up at one of the security dudes. You guys got security cameras out here? The guy shook his head. Yeah, Frank said, spitting more blood out of his mouth. Yeah, it was them. You fucking liar! The skinhead started yelling, and then everyone was shouting. The security guards were barking into their walkie talkie things, and Ray and Bob were yelling about the price and public safety. You fucking liar! The skinhead started yelling, and then everyone was shouting. The security guards were barking into their walkie talkie things, and Ray and Bob were yelling about the police and public safety. Frank just clung to Mikey's jacket. Mikey touched Frank's sticky forehead, and Frank saw the fingers come away with wet blood. Was it them? Mikey asked quietly, wiping his thumb under Frank's eye. Frank didn't say anything. Shit, Mikey said. More! Mystery invisible men hurting Frank. This time, thorns, needles, thorns on his head. The next morning, Ray is giving Frank a ride home because obviously he did not spend the night at his own house after that. And Frank admits that he's not gonna press charges on the guys who were trying to literally bust his balls because he's supposed to be keeping his nose clean. There's lawsuit shit, and he's pretty sure Bob broke one of the guy's arms, so they got what was coming to them. And then when Frank gets home, he realizes his room still looks like a crime scene, and he's like, "Oh shit, I gotta get rid of all these bloody sheets, not suspiciously somehow." And he puts them all in a trash bag, and he's mopping and stuff, and then his doorbell is ringing. And he looks and sees like who it is and the people, and he's like, "Oh shit, it's Mikey's hot brother." And this part, this little interaction, they've met before, but this interaction between Frank and George is probably one of the most iconic parts from this first part. I don't know, it just is. "Hi," said Gerard, pulling his fingers out of his mouth. He was biting his nails and giving Frank the same shy wave he'd given when they'd met. Do you remember me? I'm Mikey's brother. We met at your work the other day." "Oh, yeah, I think so," Frank lied, leaning against the door jamb in a way he hoped looked nonchalant. "Gerard, right?" Gerard beamed at him. "Yes! Man, people never remember that. I always get called Gareth or Jeremy for some reason." "You don't look like a Jeremy," Frank told him. "I know!" Gerard nodded enthusiastically, still smiling. "Anyway, I brought you a mattress." Frank blinked at him. "A what?" "A mattress." Gerard stepped back, and Frank followed him out into the hall. Sure enough, there was a mattress leaning against the wall next to Frank's door. "Mikey said something happened to yours, and this one was donated to Our Lady just yesterday." "Your lady?" Frank raised his eyebrows. "Who's your lady?" Gerard laughed and waved his hands. "No, no, Our Lady. Our Lady of Compassion? It's a church a few blocks from here. They have charity drives, clothes, food, mattresses." Frank grinned. Gerard grinned back. "Yeah, anyway, I asked if you could have it, and they said nobody else was interested, so I got a friend of mine to give me a hand getting it over here, and well, here I am." He finished uncertainly, shoving his hands in his pockets. "Is this totally weird?" "Not compared to most things that have happened to me lately," Frank said, shaking his head. "A mattress. Mikey's gorgeous brother brought him a mattress. Maybe things were looking up. So the chemistry is kind of off the charts right now. They barely interacted, but you can see where it's going. But just wait. So Gerard is gonna help him get this mattress in, but they have to get rid of the old mattress first. And he's not even put off by all the freaking blood stains. He's just like, wow, bad nosebleed. And Frank is like, yeah. "Okay, over to me, and then we'll shove it out into the hall, okay?" Gerard nodded. "Okay, well, wait, let me take my jacket off." "Put it on the couch." Frank nodded towards his living room. Gerard headed off, and Frank called after him, This is a first for me." "You don't usually accept bedroom furniture from strangers?" Gerard called back. "Nobody ever gave me any before." Frank noticed a stray spatter of blood on his nightstand and licked his thumb, rubbing over the mark. "A girl sent me flowers once, but Hawkeye's bringing me beds is new." "First time for everything," Gerard said, coming back. And Frank rubbed at the mark one last time. "Yeah, some might even say it's a little presumptuous for a." He looked up and completely forgot what he was going to say. "Priest?" Gerard said, "What?" And then touched his collar around his neck. "Oh yeah, Mikey didn't tell you?" "He did not," Frank said, staring at Gerard's throat. "A priest. A priest." And here Frank thought that the worst that could happen was that he might be straight. Frank snapped his eyes up to Gerard's face and said, "Oh God, I called you a hot guy." Gerard nodded solemnly. "You did." Which I can't believe that it didn't come up sooner that Gerard was a priest, but now he knows Gerard is a priest, and now he feels really awkward that he called him hot because he can't ever have that because he's a priest. But Gerard's okay with it. He's like, "It's okay. It's okay." So they struggle the mattress out into an alleyway outside of his apartment because I don't know what the hell else do you do with a bloody mattress. And Gerard is basically like, "Fuck, that's heavier than I thought it would be." And Frank is like, "Whoa, priests can curse?" And Gerard's like, "Yeah." And then Frank gets sad because he realizes Gerard is very hot, but he's unfortunately sworn to celibacy. He's like, "Damn my luck." And Gerard surprises Frank again by smoking a cigarette, and Frank is like, "Wow, you're like nobody else I've ever met." And now the job's done, and Gerard's just kind of like hanging around while Frank brews coffee, and they get chatting. And Gerard is really surprised to learn Frank doesn't go to church. He's like, "You don't go to church?" And Frank is like, "Yeah, whatever. I don't really even believe in God." And Gerard's like, "Oh." And Frank keeps catching him glancing at his forehead scars, and he's like, "Take a picture, it'll last longer." And Gerard reveals he was staring, but he also really he knows what really happened on the mattress because Mikey told him, and that's probably why he's acting so nonchalant about it. And he wants to know exactly what happened from Frank's perspective. So Gerard leans forward to get a better look at them scars, and he brushes Frank's hair out of the way. And boom, Gerard's magical healing powers come back in full effect, and Frank Loki got a hold back on moan because he's like, "Ah!" It's so relieving how Gerard's touch is. It just makes the pain go away. And he really does want to tell him what really happened, but he doesn't. And Gerard almost sort of implies that Frank could have done it to himself, that he hurt himself. And Frank is like, "Bro, fuck you. I did not do this to myself." And Gerard is putting all of his scarves back on. I don't know why he's always wearing scarves. That's like, I don't know. And he's about to go, but then Frank is like, "Wait, I'm sorry. I'm an asshole. There's just like a lot going on with my life right now." Like, yeah, you're probably right to assume that actually. And then Frank randomly asks what Gerard actually does as a priest, and Gerard explains he's actually an investigator for the Vatican, seeking out people who are claiming to have witnessed miracles, which Gerard claims happens the most often in South America, which is like the closest reference to like actual movie stigmata we get because it takes place like the curse that happens in that movie it comes from South America. Blah, blah, blah. And Frank innocently asks if he's ever actually found a miracle, and Gerard is like, "Not yet." So Frank is like trying to continue his normal life, but it's pretty difficult when you're constantly in pain. And eventually he caves and puts more of the mystery goo on his wrist because it makes the pain go away, but not as much as Gerard does. Back at work, Frank explains getting jumped to Brian, and he's like, "Fuck yeah, this is good for the lawsuit." Like, "We're gonna get this guy. He jumped you." And when Mikey asks Frank about Gerard bringing him a mattress last night, Frank confirms this to be true. And he's like, "Can you believe your brother accused me of self harm?" And Bob, Mikey, and Ray are all like, "Well," and he's like, "Oh, fuck off." And he tries to get Mikey to side with him because Mikey saw what happened the first time, but he refuses to say anything because, like, how do you even talk about it? So Frank is really pissed off. So he just storms out and he goes home, turns off his phone, unplugs his landline, and just drinks himself to sleep. The next morning, he feels like shit. Surprise, surprise. And he realizes he's super fucking late to work and he's already like 2 hours behind, so he might as well take a shower. But then Frank notices blood dripping on his hands and he looks in the mirror to find all the cuts on his head have reopened. "What?" said Frank. He touched his forehead and looked at his fingertips. They were crimson, and when he straightened up to look in the mirror, he saw that the cuts in his scalp had reopened and blood was trickling rapidly down his face. "My head split open," he said dumbly to his reflection. Suddenly, his feet were kicked out from under him, and he was lying on the bathroom floor, arms splayed out wide, staring up at the ceiling. "What?" he said again, and then he felt something wide, cold, and sharp drive straight through each of his wrists. He didn't scream. He didn't scream because he couldn't breathe. The pain so massive, so overwhelming, so out of the range of anything Frank had ever had a nightmare about experiencing that it stole his ability to use his lungs or his eyes to do anything but writhe helplessly in place. He is being nailed down. He's being nailed to the fucking floor. He could feel the nails driving rhythmically through, feel his bones being forced to make room until he thought they would burst his skin on either side. There were white flashes behind his eyelids, and he was making noise now, ragged animal sounds being dragged from his chest with every heavy metallic thud against his hands. His body was shutting down already. Frank felt as though he was scrambling up inside his own skin, curling into a ball and leaving his hands to suffer by themselves. Far out on the edges of his consciousness, Frank concentrated on that, on the safe lonely place inside himself where nobody could help, but nobody could hurt him anymore. And the noises got further and further away until Frank was enveloped in silence, in darkness. Frank, he heard dimly, as if from miles away. Frank, he knew that voice. Frank, it said again, louder this time, and then more words, which Frank could barely make out. Frank, die on me, fucking bring you back, kill you myself. Frank laughed, and that's what brought him back into himself with a rush, crying out as the air filled up his lungs and the pain took over again. Okay, Frank, it was Brian, cradling Frank's head on his knees. Frank, take it easy, it's me, it's me. Brian, Frank tried to say, but it came out as a wet, messy, unintelligible croak. Brian said, shh, and gathered Frank up a little tighter. It's okay, it's okay. The ambulance is on its way. Just hold on a few more minutes, okay? Just a few more, just stay with me. Frank looked down. Brian was pressing both of Frank's wrists tight between his hands, towels wrapped up around them, darkly red. Ah, he managed. Don't try to talk, Brian said firmly. We're going to get you some help. Brian started rewrapping the towels around Frank's wrist, really obviously checking his watch. We're going to fix this. You don't have to feel like this anymore. We'll figure something out, meds, a shrink, whatever you need. Oh, Brian, I didn't. Don't talk, Brian said again, in a voice that was calm but brooked no disagreement. He moved Frank so his head was resting against Brian's shoulder and held him still. Frank could feel Brian's heart beating frantically, feel his quick, uneven breaths. They stayed there together like that until the ambulance arrived. So Frank's in the hospital now. And this scene is also the most direct thing that comes from the movie. They're all convinced that Frank has tried to kill himself. And to be fair, there's no other reasonable explanation for what has happened to him. And Frank is trying to tell him, I did not do this. And then Brian and Mikey show back up, and guess who they brought with them? Gerard. And he wants to speak to Frank alone. And of course, when Gerard is going to inspect his wounds, all the pain just magically goes away. So strange, Gerard was saying. He took Frank's hand gently and turned it over so he could see the other side. I've never seen it happen like this before. See what happened? Frank's fingers twitched with the urge to slide them over Gerard's palm. What the fuck is happening to me? Gerard let go and fished around in his scarves until he came back with a little camera. You mind? He said, not a question, and didn't wait for Frank to answer before he started snapping away. This turns out to be some fetish thing. Your sense of humor is still intact, I see. Gerard brushed Frank's hair out of his face and took a few more pictures. Frank, have you ever heard of stigmata? Sure. Frank didn't nuzzle Gerard's hand or anything, but he might have turned his face towards it very slightly. Whatever, he was only human. Crazy nuns bleeding from the palms, right? Like, oh, oh no, no fucking way. You have got to be fucking kidding me. Gerard stayed silent, setting the camera down on the chair. Frank protested weakly. I don't believe in God. I know, Gerard burst out, waving his hands around. That's why this is so weird. So it seems to be that Frank is suffering from what is known as stigmata. If you're not aware of what that is, which I certainly wasn't before I read this, it's essentially the physical manifestations of the wounds of Christ on your body. And it happened to people who were like very, very devout to Christ and who like sometimes even prayed for it to happen to them because they wanted to experience what Jesus went through. And it's weird because Frank is an atheist. So why would stigmata be happening to him? So Frank begins to tell him everything that's been going on in his life and how everything's so terrible and how this supposed stigmata has been affecting him other than physically. And Gerard takes another look at his tattoo and informs him that it's actually the seraph that Saint Francis of Assisi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Assisi, something like that. It's the seraph that Saint Francis saw in a vision. And it just so happens that this Saint Francis was the first person to ever receive this stigmata. And yes, that's Francis. Frank! Oh no! Gerard starts inspecting his other wounds, like the ones on his back, and he explains to him what the scourging is, where Jesus was whipped. And you know, if you've seen Jesus Christ Superstar, like if you don't know the Bible, you see that'll help you. But he's never heard of anyone manifesting these kinds of wounds. It's usually just the wounds from the cross. And he even goes so far to explain why the wounds are manifesting on his wrists and not on his hands, because historians have proved that, like, if you were nailed to a cross through your hands, that, like, your hands would rip. But if you put it, like, through your wrist, through the bones, then you would still be held up. So he was like, wow, this is very historically accurate. And we're just learning so much. And they're like low key flirting while this is happening. And Gerard's about to ask another question about his tattoo when Brian just barges in. He's like, how's he doing, father? And Gerard's like, oh, he's fine. Anyway, I'm gonna go do some research because I love research. He does so much research, he just loves doing it. And he takes Mikey with him. And Brian is like, Frank, why didn't tell me you were so sad? Why didn't tell me that? And Frank is like, Brian, listen, I did not try and kill myself. Where is the weapon? If I did, like how would that work? And Brian was like, oh wait, good point. What's the alternative, Frank? Brian had raised his voice and was windmilling his arms around. I walk in and find you bleeding all over the fucking place after you threw a hissy fit at the shop last night. What the fuck am I supposed to think? I don't know, Frank yelled. I don't fucking know, Brian. All I know is the universe has it for me big time, and you thinking I'm a head case doesn't help. Brian stared at him red faced for a minute, then deflated and put his head in his hands. What does the father think? He thinks I have stigmata. He said the thing. He said the thing. That's the description. Oh, well, of course. Well, of course, it's stigmata. So now we fast forward a little bit, and Frank is still at the hospital, but now he's chatting with Bob and Ray. And he's like, guys, you have to break me out of the hospital. Like, I don't belong here. They're going to tell me I'm suicidal. And Bob is like, okay, let's do it. And Ray is like, wait, guys, maybe it's not a good idea to smuggle someone out of the hospital. And they're like, well, we're going to do it anyway. So are you in or not? And he was like, okay. So they're sneaking Frank out before the shrink can show up and, tell him he's suicidal. And they're just avoiding like every single doctor in the hallway when, oh no, it's Frank's doctor from the clinic that sees him all the time. And it's like, oh, they're like, oh snap. Like we can't be seen by him. So he's like hiding in like the waiting room, and he ends up seeing that girl from the club with the accent. And she's like going through some pictures on her camera, and she's like showing him too, like some pictures from when they were at the club. And then she comes across a picture of Darren Haywood, the guy with the balls. I feel like I don't have to say that every time, but you know who I'm talking about. And she's like, oh yeah, he's a huge asshole and called my friend a whore. And the picture in question is of Darren sitting in a hot tub with a bunch of girls. And Frank is like, wait a damn minute. When was this? And she's like, oh, a few weeks ago. And Frank is like, oh my God, email me this picture. And we finally learn her name. Her name is Maria, and she's like, I will email you this picture if you can get Mikey Way to call me back. And he's like, sold, I'll do it. I can do anything. And then he has to finish escape the hospital, Abby, escape the evil doctor, Abby, and thankfully they get by unnoticed. So once in the car, he reveals the good news to Ray and Bob that he has proof that Darren was in a hot tub and most likely having sex right after he had gotten his new piercing. Which, if you know, that's, getting in a hot tub, it's a really bad thing for a brand new piercing. And especially doing the deed when it's a ball piercing. Like, I feel like it goes without saying. And this is really good for Frank because it means he was right and that the infection is not his fault. hmm So now the whole crew is back at Frank's apartment, and they're just like the entire crew now. And they're basically just like slut shaming Mikey. George's like, I can't believe you slept with someone and never called them back. That's so awful. And Mikey's like, what do you know, priest? And but they get Mikey to agree to call her back so Frank can have these pictures, which is so kind of him. So Frank is like reassuring Brian that he's like fine. And for some reason, like Bob is arguing with Gerard about like women being priests or something. And then Mikey comes back from talking to Maria, and he's like, okay, she agreed to send the pictures. I don't even have to see her again. And they're all like, yay. Thanks, Mikey. And Mikey's all like, it's the least I can do. And Frank is like, bro, it's okay. And Mikey's like, bro, no, it's not. And Brian is like, they're about to have an awkward conversation. Come on, who wants to go help me clean up blood in the bathroom? And Gerard is like, what? Like he doesn't take the hint at all because he's so cute like that. So all the guys leave Mikey and Frank alone, and they kind of talk about their feelings and like how Frank wants Mikey to apologize for letting the other guys think he's crazy when Mikey knew he wasn't crazy and that he wasn't trying to hurt himself. And this is also when Mikey learns that Frank does in fact have a crush on Gerard, and he's not that surprised to learn that. So now the day's winding down and stuff, and they all agree, like, okay, Frank should not be left alone because who knows what's gonna happen to him next. And of course, Gerard offers to stay with him first. And they're gonna just like smoke cigarettes together and just like whatever. And then Frank starts asking about him, and then Frank starts like asking about like priestness and priest life and all the like celibacy thing. And Gerard kind of explains to him what like why he decided to be a priest. It's not because he didn't want to have sex, which is what Frank assumes kind of. Um he says that he wanted to save people. And Frank's like, you're not serious. And Gerard just tells him like, well, the church saved my life because I was all messed up, and you know what? I wanted to help save other people. And he kind of goes on to explain that when he was a young priest, he's still a young priest, but when he first became a priest, a lot of kids would come to him to it for advice because he was, younger, and he was basically like the super woke priest, and he would help kids in whatever way they needed, even if it isn't necessarily what their parents would have wanted for them or what the church would actually want. And that's why now his job as a priest is to just kind of like go on wild goose chases and like meet random weird people who believe that they found a miracle, so he'll stop giving kids like actual good advice. And Gerard turns it on Frank and he's like, so what made you get into piercings? And Frank's just kind of like, oh, they're cool. And this is where we learn that Gerard hates needles, which is true in real life and also kind of important later. And then somehow they get onto talking about jorking it, and Gerard informs Frank that there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't do that, and that priests can still do that. And Frank's like, what? And his mind, kind of wanders a little bit, but it's actually really interesting. He tells him about the Bible story where like people draw evidence that you're like not allowed to like lay your seed or whatever on like if it's not like for purpose of making babies. But in the story, it's it's a little more complicated than that. Okay, it's not exactly saying you can't ever do that. It's saying like the guy in the story, he was just a jerk. He was just using somebody for pleasure. He wasn't in it for the long run. So it was wrong. Anyway, so Gerard gets up and he notices that Frank has a voicemail on his answering machine, and it says doctor, and he's like, by the way, that mystery goo contains belladonna, which is poisonous, so maybe you should stop putting it on your body. And Gerard does some more thinking and he's like, wait, the things that are in there. And he pulls out this giant book and it has a painting of St. Francis and his angel. And, of course, what do you know? It's the freaking angel that Frank literally has tattooed on him, of course. And there's like a bunch of birds around it too, because he's the patron saint of animals, which is nice. And what do you know? Frank is also like, oh, I have these doves tattooed on my hips, which is true to Frank IRL. And obviously he has to like pull up his shirt to show off these tattoos because they're like on his hip bones. And Gerard is like, interesting, let me get some photos of this. So he's like touching his tattoos, and Gerard's being so close, and it's making all of Frank's pain disappear and feels amazing. And he's like gasping, and it's like really like cute and stuff, and it's like very very intimate. And then Frank is eventually like, okay, this is enough, I have to go to sleep, I can't do this anymore, and you should probably leave. And now they're like being really awkward, and Gerard's like, well, someone's supposed to stay with you at all times, and Frank is like, no, it's fine, you can go. And he does actually leave. And luckily nothing happens while Frank is alone. And then Bob comes over later to give him some dinner. Um, and he brings a little TV because you remember how Frank's TV got stolen. Very sad. And they watch Big Brother and then they watch Queer Eye, which I think is really funny for some reason. And then all of a sudden the pain in Frank's wrist starts flaring up again. And then he starts to get pain in his feet and Bob is like, "Oh my god, I'm calling an ambulance." And then Frank is like, "No, no, no, no. Call Gerard. Please call Gerard." And Frank is like freaking out, and Bob decides to put him in the bathtub because at least then there won't be blood everywhere, staining everything. And he's in a lot of pain because now there's going to be holes in his feet, but he doesn't pass out like other times, so that's nice. And then after it's all over, Bob carries him back to his bed, and Gerard shows up right at that moment, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I wasn't here." Even though Frank was the one who told him to leave, whatever. And Frank's like not even upset. He's just like glad that Gerard is here now and he can make the pain go away. And that's also when he realizes that Gerard isn't even in his collar or his priest collar or anything. He's just like in his regular dude clothes, just like a jeans and a t-shirt. And Frank just like kind of pulls him forward like onto the bed so like Gerard can like lay on him and he's like, "I'm sorry, this is so weird, but you make the pain go away." And Bob's like like witnessing all of this. He's like and Gerard is like, "Well, why didn't you tell me that I made the pain go away? I never would have left you." And Frank is like, "Cause it's weird." So Gerard is now going to take a look at his feet, not in a weird way, but to inspect his wounds and take some pictures, not in a weird way. And he tells them that he was doing research on all the herbs that were in the mystery goo, and they're often used for not nice magic activities. And he decides that they all need to partake and do some more research because um, although in other cases of stigmata, the victims just like live with it for a while, or I mean, like they're fine because it's usually just the wrists and the feet. They don't get everything that Frank has, and the only wound that he's missing now is the spear in Jesus's side. That's the one, that's the big one. And they're like, okay, if that actually happened, like, I don't know if you would survive. So we need to stop this before that happens. So again, the whole gang's over now at Frank's place, and they're doing all this research with these old books that Gerard produced. And by the time like everybody gets all together, they've already determined a lot of the books are not freaking useful at all, but they're still looking. And Mikey like walks into Frank's bedroom and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" And Frank and Gerard are like, "Reading." And Mikey's like, "No, I mean, why are you cuddling right now? Is that normal? Is that going to help Frank?" And they like weren't even cuddling. They were just like next to each other on the bed. But oh my god, it's so scandalous. And Frank is like telling everyone, "Okay, me being around Gerard makes the pain go away. I know it's weird, but that's my truth." And Ray is like, "Oh my god, you're a healer. Oh my god." And Mikey's like he's kind of weirded out, but like whatever, put that aside. And Gerard's like explaining what they're all supposed to be looking for in the books, if you see anything about the herbs and the goo. Um, and then he says something like, "It's because it's weird that there's like evil herbs, like there's rosemary in it as well." And Ray is like, "Oh, that's used for protection." And they're all like, and Ray is like, "Guys, I make my own hair products. Like, I know this shit." And there's also like mistletoe in it, which turns out is interesting because mistletoe like used to be a tree. Like it would grow like the whole plant was a tree and was presumably the are probably the kind of wood that Jesus was crucified on. So it's just kind of like adding insult to injury in this little potion. So Gerard's explaining like the kind of system they have going on for the research. He's like, "Okay, this is what we have for notes so far," and he can't even decipher like what the notes are. He's like, "Wait, who wrote this? Like, I don't even know what this is." And Brian is like, "Stop!" And he goes like all manager on them, and he's like, "Okay, we're gonna divide up the work," and then he pulls out like a bunch of pieces of paper and like pens, and they're like, "Oh, okay," and now they're working more efficiently. Okay, and they're studying this stuff. And Mikey is like, hey, this is kind of like Buffy. And then they all start arguing about which character they are. I've only seen a little bit of Buffy, but Frank is totally Buffy, okay? And Ray is totally Willow. And then they get distracted even further, and then they start like getting more distracted like from on topic, and they keep asking Gerard like, which patron saint shares my name? And then like Ray has to ruin their fun for a second because he's like, guys, I think I found something. And Gerard looks what he found and he's like, guys, we've cracked it. We figured it out. So essentially, Luke, the tattoo dude who gave Frank the angel tattoo, actually used the tattoo as a way to mark Frank for sacrifice for God. Because according to this book that Ray found, if Luke drinks the blood, like Frank's blood, at the moment of sacrifice, he'll become one with Christ. Luke will. Um, which it doesn't really make any sense. It doesn't make sense to Gerard, and he's pretty sure that it's all bullshit. It's not a real spell. But he does think that the spell could kill Frank. So he's like, okay, we have to get rid of this tattoo. We have to alter it in some way. Which honestly, it took them kind of a long time to realize that it was directly connected to the tattoo. I think they should have been like, wait, weird things started happening after you got this tattoo. We should change the tattoo or something. But it's okay. It's okay. They're new at this. So the obvious solution is to just like alter the tattoo in some way. So Bob gets his tattooing needles and stuff or whatever. I don't know what they're all called. And Frank is like, can you like maybe like work it into my sleeve or something? And Brian is like, bro, just start tattooing it. Like just start like literally do anything to it. And well, you remember how Gerard's terrified of needles. He can't even really look at the tattoo needle. He can't even like be around it, which is bad because Frank needs him right now because he's in a lot of pain. He needs Gerard with him. And Mikey makes Gerard like man the fuck up, and so he can hold on to Frank because he is in so much not even tattoo related pain. And Gerard is like holding on to Frank and like pretending he's in like his own world and like his happy space. And then Bob like lifts up the needle after like and he's like, so there's nothing there. It didn't work, and um he's like invincible. Like this portion of his body is like you can't like harm it. And they're all like, okay, so this is bad. This is not good. And Frank's like, I know. How am I ever gonna get another tattoo again? And Brian is like, Frank, you're literally gonna die. Like, can you not worry about your tattoos right now? And then Gerard is kind of like rocking Frank back and forth like comfortingly. And then Ray is like, wait, what if it's Gerard that's making him invincible? Because he's like holding on to him. And remember when Gerard touched him and his tattoo got magically healed? Like, what if that's related to it somehow? And okay, they're like, okay, so maybe Gerard should let go of Frank. But Frank's like, no, don't let go of me, don't let go. And so now they're like back to square one. They're kind of out of options. And Frank is like, wait, let's cut off my hand. And they're all like, and he's like, yeah, I got a cleaver in my kitchen. For some, I've never met anyone who owns a cleaver, but he's like, yeah, there's a cleaver in my kitchen. And Mikey goes and gets it. And everyone is like, Frank, this is a really terrible idea. And for some reason, Mikey's like fully ready to do it. He's like, yeah, I'm going to save you. And it's like crazy. Everyone's like acting crazy. And they're like, it's fine. It's fine because we have Gerard's healing power. So we can just like heal his like stomp after we like cut off his hand. And Frank is like ready to like count down to like getting his literal hand chopped off. And then Brian literally goes, put the fucking cleaver down right the fuck now. And then Brian kind of goes on a little tangent. Let me act out right now. He goes, everybody sit the fuck down. You are the stupidest motherfuckers I've ever come across in my whole goddamn life. Do you know that? I don't know how the fuck I managed to work with you assholes in a place where we're surrounded by sharp objects and not lose a limb every other week. You crazy bastards. You're all motherfucking certifiable. And I swear to God, the next person to suggest something so fucking insane it could land us all a fucking Darwin Award is going to feel my wrath, and never mind the Almighty's. And Gerard's like, I agree. And Brian turns on him. He's like, "You are a priest. You of all people should fucking know better. But no, you're the worst of all. It's not enough that you show up in our lives and suddenly we're fighting God or the devil or some crazy renegade tattoo artist who thinks he's the devil. But now you've got my staff pointing knives at each other. I don't know how you roll in the Vatican, Father, but this is not how we live our lives." And George's like, and then he goes, "This is totally out of our league. Ray is a hairdresser." And they're all just like baffled. And then they all start like burst out laughing. They're like, "Oh my god, this is so fucking ridiculous. I can't believe we were just gonna chop Frank's hand off. What is our lives right now? What is our life? What's even happening?" And Mikey's like, "Okay, yeah, that was a bad idea. Glad we didn't do that. But we actually don't know if Frank can really like be harmed." But of course, I remember they have all these other like tattoo needles, so they just like stick a needle in him, and yeah, it does hurt him. So now they're back to doing research, and Brian is trying to figure out what the tattoo shop Luke tattooed him at was, so they can track it down. But all Frank remembers is that it was raining and it was at a street. Not very helpful. But Frank is also like, I kind of don't want to track down the crazy guy who's trying to kill me. Like, I don't really want to get involved in that aspect. I kind of just want to get better, you know? And then Gerard's thinking, like, wait, why would Luke put protective herbs in the goop alongside the toxic ones? And then Ray has another smart nerd moment, and he suggests that the goop could be doing two things at once. When you make a hair product that, you want to give the roots body and smooth down flyaway ends, that's his example, it can do more than one thing, two things at once. So what if the goop is preparing Frank for sacrifice, but also protecting the sigil itself? And Frank is like, "Bro, forget it. This guy has to die. We have to track down this guy. We have to kill him. I can't do this." And Gerard is like, "Wait, I'm all for, catching this guy, but I can't support violence. Oh my gosh." And Mikey's like, "Well, what else are we supposed to do with him?" And Gerard realizes, we could just turn him over to the Vatican. After the spell is all broken, they're all like, "Well, what does that even mean?" And Gerard admits he doesn't know what happens to people after they get turned over to the Vatican, but he is pretty close with one of the cardinals who could probably help them out. And then this is my absolute favorite sequence moments and of dialogue in like any fan fiction I've ever read ever. Like, I this made me really excited to read. So I'm just gonna read it to you. "We can make a salt circle around the bed," Ray said. "I saw that in a movie." "You saw that on Supernatural," Bob corrected him. Ray flipped him off. "Whatever, man. They have AC/DC on the soundtrack. That show's awesome." "I don't know. It's not very accurate," Gerard said, wrinkling his nose. "You didn't care that Buffy was inaccurate," Mikey reminded him. "Well, duh," Gerard rolled his eyes. "Buffy was good." Ray gasped, like an actual gasp, and stared at Gerard. "I can't believe you would say that. Oh, please, their theology alone is completely—" "I'm gonna stop this now before it starts," Brian said decisively. I love that dialogue. I used to be a really big fan of Supernatural, and this is the crossover I always knew I needed, so thank you, Bexless, for that dialogue. And now they're all deciding that it makes the most sense if they all just stay at Frank's apartment. Like, no, he shouldn't be left alone for any reason whatsoever. And they're like deciding where they should all sleep. And Mikey's like, "Well, I get the couch." And Frank's like, "Well, obviously I got the bed and I can share it with someone." And Brian's like, "Well, shouldn't Gerard sleep with you?" And Frank's like, "Oh, right." And Mikey's like, "Frank, you have to go to the bathroom." And he's like, "No, I don't." He's like, "Yes, you do." And he takes him to the bathroom so they can talk again. And he actually does help Frank piss because remember, he has bad feet right now. And he helps him put his jammies on. And then Mikey gets serious for a second. Mikey sighed. "Look, dude, you and my brother." Frank opened his mouth, but Mikey made a frustrated gesture and went on. "He's not, I mean, you can't. I don't want, you know?" "I really don't." Frank shook his head. Mikey made some more gestures and rolled his head on his neck a little bit and sighed some more. Frank just waited. Eventually, Mikey would get to the point. It was just sometimes you had to suffer through some nervous calisthenics first. "He's been thinking about leaving the priesthood," Mikey admitted finally in a low voice. "Oh my god," Frank whispered back. "Why?" Frank shook his head. Mikey shook his head. A lot of stuff. Mostly he doesn't feel like he's helping anyone. And there's like political stuff. He's progressive or whatever, I don't know. Frank eyed him. You do know. Alright, I do know. Mikey smiled a tiny bit. But I'm not telling you. The point is, he's really confused right now, and he's lonely, Frank, and and your Mikey waved his hands at Frank's general being. Frank raised an eyebrow on Mikey's side. You're persistent. I'm Mikey, Jesus, Frank hissed, shoving at him the best he could without falling over himself. I'm not gonna try and get into his pants for fuck's sake. Who do you think I am? I know you! Mikey hissed back. I know what you look like when you're really into someone, Frank. I'm not an idiot. And I'm not a. Frank couldn't even think of a word for someone who would try to seduce a priest, even if that priest was totally hot and had magical hands. A harlot, he finished finally. Mikey's eyes almost fell out of his head, they rolled so hard. A harlot? Seriously? So Mikey's just trying to tell Frank that he's looking out for him. He doesn't want him to try and get involved with Gerard because he doesn't think it's going to work out. And he's just trying to warn him in advance because he's looking out for both of them. So Frank then has no choice but to crawl into bed next to Gerard. And he's like, this isn't too awkward, is it? And Gerard's like, no, it's fine, it's fine. Okay. So a little bit of time has passed and Frank has fallen asleep, but when he wakes up, he realizes he's kind of curled up next to Gerard while he was sleeping. And he sees that Gerard is still awake, but it's dark and he can't really see what he's doing. And it's dark and he can't really see what he's doing, but he realizes that he is saying the rosary. And I'm not Catholic. I don't know what that means exactly, but I do have my dead grandma's rosary that I'm wearing for this. So I hope she's learning about Catholic Yowie with this too. But anyway, Frank like suddenly like says out loud like, "Oh, you're saying the rosary." And Gerard is like, "Oh, I'm sorry I woke you." Frank is like, it's okay. Did you talk to the cardinal yet?" And Gerard's like, "Yeah, the cardinal will probably be able to help." And then Frank asks to see the rosary, and he tells him, it was my grandma's. And he also said that his grandma always wanted him to be in like musicals and stuff. Ah. And Frank gives it back to him, and then there's like a silence for a second. Frank is like, were you praying for me? I've never seen you pray before. And Gerard doesn't fully answer the question, but he explains he's more of an informal prayer guy. He kind of just like talks to God, like out loud in general, And sometimes he does answer, but not in the way you expect, of course. And they laugh about how sometimes he talks to God to keep him company. Mikey's right, he's very lonely. And like watching Jeopardy or some shit and you just wanna like talk to someone while you're watching the TV. Cause he's lonely. And Frank is like, do you miss it? Gerard, um, he's so lonely, he tells him, I don't miss the sex, but yes, I do miss yelling at the TV with somebody. It's nice to have someone to do that with. He goes, yeah, I miss that. I'm only human, Frank. They were curled up facing each other. They were very close. Frank kissed him. What? What? Just like that. Just like that. He did it. Like he's saying, like in his mind, he's like, oh, he didn't mean to. It just happened. His body just decided. And he's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't mean to. It's just because you're like Advil to me. My life is so shit right now. And Gerard's like, oh, no, this is my fault. My fault. Guys, if Gerard doesn't leave that damn priesthood right now, oh my god. And Gerard's all like, yeah, this is my fault for not resisting temptation well enough. I must resist the temptation of beautiful, short, emo gay guys. And Frank's still like freaking out a little bit. And he's like, can we just pretend this didn't happen? Because, he did kiss him, so. And Gerard's like, oh, yeah, like, that's fine. Like, it's okay. Like, damn. And Frank's like, no, it's not okay. This isn't okay. And Gerard's like, okay, chill. Just like lay down. You look like you're gonna puke. And this part is like so sad to me because they clearly want each other so bad, but there's like so many reasons they just can't right now. And there's just that stupid freaking collars keeping them apart. You didn't mean it, he whispered when Frank had managed to slow his breathing down to a regular in and out pace. Frank shook his head. I didn't. Gerard nodded thoughtfully. Okay, Frank. Okay. Never happened? Never happened. Frank heaved a giant sigh of relief and closed his eyes. You know, yelling at the TV is totally a friend thing, too. I yell at the TV with Bob all the time. You're allowed friends, right? He heard Gerard's rosary clacking slightly. I'm allowed friends. Deal then, Frank said hopefully. You get me out of this alive, and you can come yell at the TV with us anytime you want. Gerard was quiet for a minute, but when he spoke, his voice was smiling. Deal. So the next morning, Frank wakes up to the sound of his phone ringing. So he just picks it up without thinking, and he hears a quote, weirdly familiar male voice. And he's telling him he found his dog. And he's like, oh my God, it's almost too good to be true. So he just gives him his address without even thinking. And then he tells Gerard once he's up, like, oh, everyone's so happy, yay, we get the dog back. And Frank's like, let me go tell the other guys. But turns out everyone else went home because like they need like clean clothes and stuff. So now it's just Frank and Gerard again. And Gerard has made some coffee because he was up all night reading about exorcisms and stuff. I don't know if he slept at all. And we learned that Gerard has taken a course on exorcism. So, like, if that's something they need to do, like, I guess Gerard is prepared for that. And then there's a knock at the door, and Gerard's like, oh, I'll get it, I'll get it. Hi, Gerard said enthusiastically as he opened the door. Thank you so much for coming. No problem, said that voice Frank had heard before. And then Gerard jerked forward suddenly, out of sight. Frank heard his voice, muffled, saw his feet kicking out from behind the door. He pushed himself up off the couch, heart battering inside his chest and stomach rolling over. But before he could take a step forward, Gerard slumped down onto the floor in a heap, and there was Luke standing over him. Oh, God, Frank breathed. God's not listening to you, brother, Luke said grimly, and came towards Frank with one of his hands raised high. Frank turned around, scrambled, felt Luke's hand yanking him back and pinning him against Luke's chest. Frank scratched and fought. He saw the coffee table overturned, heard the mugs and his ashtray smashing on the floor, and then Luke's hand clamped down over Frank's nose and mouth. When Frank tried to breathe in, his head filled with fumes that made blood red circles spin before his eyes. Then he heard Luke saying, easy, easy, don't fight it now, and then everything went black. Oh shit, you guys. Oh shit. So this is getting serious. We're reaching the climax of the story. Oh my god. So when Frank wakes up, he is tied to a table and only wearing his underwear. And he's kind of fading in and out, but once he's kind of getting more alert, he notices this room that he's in is very dark and has these weird ass symbols all over the walls. And there's like this fucked up painting of the Virgin Mary. It just like looks wrong. And there's a giant crucifix above his head, too, of course. And then, of course, he notices Gerard is passed out and tied to a chair next to him. So he tries to wake Gerard up, and Gerard's like, okay, where the fuck are we? What's going on? And Frank is assuming, we were captured by Luke. This must be Luke's place, and he must have used chloroform. And Gerard's like, that's what I was thinking. Why are you half naked? And Frank's like, I don't want to stick around and find out. So they're hatching a plan, and they realize Gerard is just tied up with like some sort of thin rope. So Gerard like shimmies in his chair like over to the table that Frank is tied to. And Gerard's like, oh, what the fuck is all this? And Frank's like, what is it? And Gerard tells him that there's a bunch of medical equipment and shit like on the table next to him. And Frank's like, oh fuck. But Gerard manages to like get like a little scalpel off the table. And he like gets a way to like hand it to Frank, and then he can like start to like cut the rope on Gerard's hands. It's all very technical. So Gerard has gotten himself untied now, but Frank is still tied up, but the rope he's tied up with is a lot thicker, so he's having a harder time. And Frank is like, so what do those scary words in that big crucifix say? And Gerard's like, oh, it's Latin for I thirst. And he's starting to be like, yeah, it's part of like the blah blah blah, starting to explain it. And then Luke steps in, he shows up and he's like, yeah, it's the part of the last 7 words of Jesus Christ. And they're like, ah! But Frank is like, we know what you're up to. We're gonna put a stop to you. And then all Luke does is put his palm on Frank's head, and he's instantly in like insane amount of pain, and the scars on his forehead are reopening. And Gerard is a pacifist, but he's like, oh my god, get off of him, and he tries to like push him away, but Luke just like backhands Gerard so fucking hard, and Frank is literally the one tied up, and he's like, "Oh my god, leave him alone. Your business is not with him." And Gerard is like trying to do like the Steven Universe thing, trying to be like, "It's okay, like you don't have to do this, like you don't have to be the bad person. You can still do the right thing." And Luke's like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah, was it the right thing to spend the night in his bed?" Which I don't even know how he knows about this, but oh my god. And they're like, oh, oh. And Gerard's like, I'm helping him. I can help you too. And Luke's like, "There's no helping me." He's kind of like the Joker, you know. And Frank is like, What are you even going to gain from killing me?" And Luke's like, "This would have been over ages ago if you hadn't deceived me." And Frank is like, What are you talking about?" And he's saying like, "You were supposed to be alone. I didn't come looking for you. You're a good soul in a bad place. You came looking for me." And George starts like trying to like be like, "I can help you again." And then Luke is like, "You don't know shit about God." And then he punches him until he's on the floor, and then he like kicks him, and he's saying some crazy stuff about like Jesus's essence. He's not making any sense, to be honest. Gerard just like grabs him by the ankles, and he's like stupid, so he falls over. And Gerard's like, "Sorry!" And then he manages to untie Frank. But before Frank can like even like try and do anything like get away or anything, he's in so much pain. He just like grabs onto Gerard and like puts his head like up into his neck, and he's like, "Make the pain go away." And Gerard's like comforting him. He's like, "Shh, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay." And then there's like a banging on the door, and they're like, "Oh my god, what now? Like, what could this possibly be?" And then Luke is like coming at Gerard again. He's like, "I'm gonna take both of your lives." And Frank's ankles are still tied up, so he's like trying to do that, but he's like getting all bloody now. Oh god. And then he realizes on the banging on the side of the door where the banging's coming from, he can hear someone calling his name, and he realizes it's Brian, and he's like, "Brian, help! He's gonna kill Gerard." And Luke is like literally like on the ground, like strangling Gerard right now, and and Frank like can't do anything about it because his ankles are still tied up. And Frank's like trying to tell him like, just just hit him. But Gerard's a pacifist. Um, but it's okay because then the door bursts open, and then Bob is like there, and he's punching Luke in the face, and Mikey goes to help Gerard, and Ray and Brian are untying Frank, and Brian's like, "Father, what do we do?" And Luke is like, "There's nothing to be done now. You're too late." Brian's like, "Okay, somebody tie this motherfucker up." And then Frank's in even worse pain. He's just like literally like being clawed apart. And he like the wounds are reopening and there's blood everywhere. And he's like, "Gerard, it's happening, it's coming." And Gerard is instantly by his side. He's like, "I'm here, it's gonna be okay." But this time when he's like touching Frank, the pain isn't really going away. And Frank is like, "It's not working, like you can't help me anymore." And Gerard and Mikey are like on either side of Frank, and they're like holding onto his hands. And Gerard looks at Mikey, and they have this like silent sibling communication, and they're both like looking like worried as fuck. And Frank's like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna die." And then Ray is like, "Wait, Gerard, I brought some of your books and like herbs and things and whatnot." And Gerard's like, "Oh my god, Ray Toro, you genius." And they start mixing some herbs and whatnot. They like light the shit, and then he's like, "Mikey, take this cross." And Mikey's like, "Huh?" But there's no time for that. And he's like, "Okay, Mikey, you take this cross." And Mikey's like, "What?" But he's like, he's in priest mode, okay? He's putting them all into positions. And he's like, "Okay, when I say so, say this Latin." And honestly, if I was on the spot like that, I wouldn't be able to repeat the Latin perfectly. But he's like, "Just repeat after me," basically. "Hold on just a little longer, Frank," he murmured. "I can't," Frank confessed, writhing when the pain flashed brightly in his side. "Gerard, I'm going to fucking die." "I promised you, didn't I?" Gerard said grimly. Then he pressed his wet fingers to Frank's forehead and closed his eyes. And then he starts saying all this shit, and Frank is like, he literally is dying. And now he's like having more of that moment kind of he had earlier, when especially when he got the thorn scars. He could It felt like he could like feel the people who were like there when Jesus died. Like he literally like was physically becoming Jesus. And now he's like furious, and that like the people around him like can't understand the pain he's going through, and he can like hear his mom crying, which obviously his mom isn't actually there, but like this is just what I mean, he's experiencing Jesus's crucifixion. And then they start saying their Latin and stuff, and then Luke screams, there's pain in Frank's side, and then everything goes white. It's like whoosh, like a nuclear explosion just happened. And then Frank wakes up. He wakes up. He's not dead. He's like, "Oh, so we won?" And Gerard's like, "Welcome back." And despite the fact that he literally looks like he just got thrown into a blender, as Bob eloquently puts it, he is okay. He just feels like shit because he just lost consciousness and then regained it, but somehow he's all right. And then Mikey just happened to bring Gerard's phone with him, and guess who's calling? But the Cardinal. And Gerard's like, "Oh, hello. So the situation has progressed significantly since we last spoke. A lot has happened." And they have Luke still just like all tied up, and Gerard tells him that, the Cardinal's gonna send some guys from the Vatican and they're just gonna take care of him. And they're like, "Okay, Frank, like if you wanna like punch the shit out of this guy, like now's your chance." And he's like, "No, no, he's going to hell. I'll be fine knowing that." So the guys from the Vatican show up incredibly quickly, and they're like wearing suits and stuff. And one of them is referred to as Howard, and I don't think I ever really realized this until like I don't know, a while after I read it for the first time. I think that is supposed to be Jeffa Howard from The Used. And he does have an associate too who isn't named in this one. He might be named in the next part. I can't remember though. I think he's supposed to be Burt McCracken. Honestly, I could be wrong about that because I don't remember. But he's described as a little dude with a ponytail. So I mean, I mean, yeah, but I'm pretty sure that Howard is supposed to be Jeffa Howard, which is kind of funny. But anyway, they're like, "Okay, Father Way, you have to return to the Vatican with us. You have to escort the perpetrator or whatever." And they're like talking to Frank, and we're like, "We need a complete statement from you." And Frank's like, I already told everything to Gerard. Like he took pictures, he recorded a lot of the things we said. Like I don't want to talk about this. And then ponytail guy, he's like, just leave him alone. Let the kid go home. And they're like, well, of course, also remember, do not talk to anyone about what has happened today or what has been happening, or bad things will happen, basically. So they sign their NDA and they're like, "Okay, Father Way, we need to leave right now." And he's like, "Now? I don't even have any of my stuff with me." And they're like, "We'll make a stop by your house." And he's like, "I have to leave everyone already." So he's like, "Just give me a minute, okay?" And Mikey's like, "Wow, so you just got back to New Jersey and now you have to leave again? That's it?" And Short's like, "Yeah, I mean, that's my job. Like, I want to stay, but I can't." And Mikey's like, "Whatever." And he's like kind of moody, pissed off about it, but he does understand. And then he gives Mikey a hug, he gives some of the other guys a hug, and then he goes to Frank and he's like, "So they might insist on speaking to you, but I'm gonna try my best to like keep you out of it." And Frank's like, "Thanks for everything. Thanks for everything, because I thought you were gonna have to say, the last rites over me because I thought I was gonna die." And he calls Frank very brave because most people probably would have given up if they were in his sort of situation. And Frank's like, he's kind of like embarrassed right now because everyone had to like come together and save him. And now George's leaving and he's calling him brave. And he's just like, "Ugh." And then Gerard gives him a big, tight hug and he's like, "Take care of yourself. You know how to reach me." And Frank's like, "Mhm, mhm." And then Gerard's just like making sure like he doesn't have any lasting side effects from the situation. He's like, "You haven't been getting any visions or anything after this, have you?" And like, because most stigmatics report, and Frank's like, "I'm not a stigmatic. I did not get a gift from God. It was just a whack job who had it out for me." And Gerard's like, "Yeah, I guess that's true." And they're like, "Okay, Father Way, like we seriously need to leave now." And he's like, bye guys. And they're like, bye Gerard. And then Mikey puts a hand on Frank's shoulder and he's like, come on, let's go home. Now, that would normally be like the end of the story, but there's actually more after that. This part is almost kind of like an epilogue, except it's a little bit longer than your usual epilogue. So we're going forward in time a little bit, and Frank is having this like really sexy like dream sequence that I don't want to like go into too much detail about, but basically Frank is dreaming about being with Gerard in his bed and stuff, you know. And then a phone ringing wakes him up, and he gets up, jerks off, and doesn't even answer the phone. But good news, it turns out, you know, remember his dog? Remember his lost dog? So his dog got picked up by a family, and it's a little cliche, but when he goes to the house and see these two little girls in this family running around with his dog, he's like, you know what? It's okay. She's yours now. She'll be happier here. And he even says like she's not my dog anymore. And then more good news, it turns out they don't have to go to court for the ball inflation because all of their charges were dropped because he didn't have a valid case anyway because he got his own balls infected. And this is good for Frank, but he's a little bummed because he kind of wanted to say his piece on the matter in court and to talk smack about this guy in front of a judge. But it's still a good thing. And Mikey can kind of tell Frank is like kind of feeling weird right now. He can tell when he's down. He's like, okay, you should come out with us tonight. And Frank's like, I'm not in the mood. And Ray is like, ah, come on, it'll be fun. And Frank's like, I'm not in the mood. And then he's all like, look, can you guys stop acting like I'm gonna fall on the ground and start crying if you look at me wrong? I'm fine. I'm not a fucking China doll. You don't have to keep up this fucking tiptoe act. And Bob's like, maybe you should stop acting like such a bitch. We would. Damn! And Brian's like, what Bob is trying to say is that you just don't seem like yourself right now. And he's like, do you maybe need to like talk to someone about like what happened to you? Because a lot kind of happened to you recently. And Frank's like, whatever, I'm fine. I gotta go. And they're like, damn, he's being an asshole. So fast forward a little bit, and Ray made Frank go on a walk with him just to like get him out and about and stuff and get like fresh air. And he's telling Frank how Mikey's like talked to Gerard recently and that Luke is officially no longer a threat. And Frank is like, whatever, I don't even care. And Ray's like, okay. And he's like, oh, I need to stop in the store real quick. And Frank's like, whatever, I'm gonna stay outside like he's like a dog or something. And he's like kind of people watching and like and keeping track of every time he notices someone like wearing a cross or like other religious stuff and because he's kind of like I don't know wary now. And someone accidentally pushes past him and he like jumps and accidentally knocks over a magazine stand onto some other guy, and the guy's like, hey, you got a problem? What's your fucking deal, man? And Frank just like loses it, and then he has the guy up against the wall with his arm twisted, and then Ray is there, and he's like, whoa, 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 pulling him away, and the dude's like, whoa, take it easy. And then Frank like turns on Ray, and he's like, I didn't need your help. But you know, clearly the other guy did. And then Frank's like, you're a fucking moron to that guy that he pushed. And then Ray's like, why are you being such an asshole right now? And Frank's like, oh, I've always been an asshole. And he's still, you know, being in a bad mood and being an asshole. And Bob is like kind of trying to make him feel better. And he's like, do you want me to fix your keep the faith tattoo? And Frank's like, no, it's fine. And Bob's like, okay, what about something new to like, what do you want to do for your next tattoo? Maybe something to commemorate surviving all this. And Frank's like, oh, you mean like these? And then he shows off his wrist scars and he's like, do you think I can forget this? I need the opposite. Actually, I need my mind erased. And he just like is like picking a fight with him for like no reason. He's just kind of like pissed off. He's like, I don't want everyone to act like everything's normal. And Bob's like, I thought you wanted us to go back to normal. And then Frank just like punches Bob for no reason. Obviously Bob punches back, and then Brian walks in. He's like, what the fuck is going on? Are you guys fighting? And Frank's about to start like explaining, and then Brian's like, Frank, just go the fuck home right now. Like, you need to figure your shit out. Like, we all need to figure our shit out. Just go home. And Frank's mad as fuck, but then he's also like sad. He's like, why did I punch him? He's like, Brian, I just want to forget all of this. And he's like, I know, buddy. And then 2 days later, Frank opened the door and Gerard was standing there. I'm gagged. Oh my god, what's he gonna do? What's he gonna say? So Gerard is back. He's back in New Jersey from the Vatican already, and he's gotten a haircut. Ooh, and he's gotten a little bit of a tan. And obviously Frank's gonna let him in. He makes him some coffee, and they're shooting the shit a little. And Frank's like, "So what happened to Luke?" And Gerard's like, "Oh, I actually can't tell you about it, but I promise he can't hurt you anymore." And Frank's like, "Well, I wasn't really worried about it, but I think I deserve to know what happened to him, but like whatever." And then Gerard just like starts touching his forehead again, and he's like fine with it, and then he kind of like jerks away, and Gerard's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, but your scars are looking better." I mean, and then he's like, "By the way, I want to thank you." And he starts to talk about how he's had some confusing feelings about the church. And then he's like, "Actually, I don't want to lay this all on you." And then Frank's like, "No, please, please tell me. Tell me like how you're feeling right now." And he starts saying, before all this went down, I was wondering whether I'd made the right choice. I mean, I had to be away from Mikey, from everyone I care about a lot of the time, and I wasn't really helping anyone. I felt like an insurance claims adjuster going around telling people their miracles weren't real. And then I met you. And you made me see that I was in completely the wrong place. I don't have to serve God that way, Frank. I don't know how I could have gotten it so wrong. Well, except that if I'd been on a different path, I might have never met you, and then we wouldn't have been having this conversation. So I guess it's something I had to go to in order to realize. And Frank stops him and he says, "Gerard, what do you mean you were in the wrong place?" And he tells him the cardinal has offered him a new position, and he's going to be helping people like Frank. So he's not leaving the church. He basically explains that he's still going to be traveling, but he's going to, instead of looking for miracles, he's going to be helping people who are in predicaments like Frank. And Frank is like, I mean, he doesn't know what he was expecting. Like, did he really think like Gerard's gonna like dump God so he can be with Frank? Like, no, that's not exactly what's gonna happen. Like, they still don't even know each other that well. But Frank is, he's happy for Gerard, but he's also very fucking disappointed. And then Gerard starts to bring up when they kissed. Remember in their moment of weakness when they kissed? I haven't forgotten. And he's like, I don't want you to think that I. And he's like, never mind. I'm just glad you're okay. And Frank is like, I'm not okay. But he doesn't say that. And I kind of feel like Gerard was going to say something about like, he doesn't want to feel like he's leading Frank on or something because it can't happen between them, unfortunately. And Gerard is actually only stopping in New Jersey very briefly for a little bit and he has to leave again. But he just wanted to see Frank before he had to leave. And he's telling Frank, like, I hope I get to see you again before I have to go. And Frank, he wants that too, but he's being all angsty. So he's like, we'll see. And they're both like, oh, okay, like, bye, see you around. And then just as Gerard is leaving, Frank like snaps out of it and he's like, of course I'll see you before you leave. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? And Gerard's like, okay. And then when Frank shows up to work, when everybody's there and Gerard is there, everyone informs Frank that they're going with him. They are going with Gerard to save lives. That is what Mikey tells him. And Frank's like, huh? Like, what do you mean? Like, all of you? And Bob's like, yeah, I mean, like, we want to help. And Frank's like, Gerard, was this your idea? And Gerard's like, not really. I mean, sort of. I like mentioned it, but and George's trying to figure out like why do you seem upset, Frank? And Ray's like, oh yeah, the we includes you too, Frank. Like you're included in this. And Frank's like, oh wow, I'm invited too. You guys are so sweet and for including me in your fucking insane plan to find more crazy assholes who like to bleed people to death. I'm just so touched. And if it's not like super obvious yet, this is kind of the part that's like setting up for the sequel to the second part of Unholyverse, which is like something you don't see in fan fictions very often, but I kind of love it. That's like, yeah, this story is going to continue. They're going to go around the country now. And it sounds like Frank does not want to be in the sequel, but he doesn't have that choice because he is like the main character, unfortunately. And he's going to come around eventually. And Gerard is gonna be the reason. And Gerard says some like weird Latin, and Frank is like, what the fuck is that supposed to be? And Gerard's like, oh, you don't know? It's one of the 7 words of Christ. You were saying it when I was praying over you at Luke's. Remember that? You remember that? And Frank's like, what? No, I wasn't aware I was doing that. I don't know Latin. And he tells him, like, if it was just Luke doing some spell shit, how would you have known to say that? Because you don't know Latin. And Frank tells him, like, he's like, I know you saw something. Like, I know it wasn't just like a made up like spell, okay? And Frank admits, like, yeah, like I heard my mother crying. And Gerard's like, yeah, I don't think that was part of the spell. Frank is like, well, this is such bullshit. I don't even believe in God. There's no way this entire situation was God calling me to help you guys help him. I am not God's soldier. And Gerard's like, Frank, we don't have to understand what he tells us. We just have to listen. And Frank thinks about the night they shared together, and it's like, oh, he never answers in the way you expect. That's what Gerard said. I remember. And Brian has literally sold the shop for this. So he is all in. Everyone is all in. And Frank is like, really? Like all of you, you're all gonna do this? And they're just like, Frank, will you please just like think about it? And he's like, okay, I'll think about it. But honestly, Frank still isn't really convinced. So now Mikey needs to talk to him mano y mano. And Loki, the frakiness of it all, will strike again. And he goes to Frank's house and they smoke some cigarettes together. He's like, why don't you want to come with us? And Frank's like, I don't want to take another turn as Satan's pincushion. And Mikey's like, valid, but that might not happen. And also, like, that wasn't even Satan who was doing that to him. So, like, why are you scared? And Frank, he really's fucking thinking about it. He's like, you know what? Yeah, I am scared actually. And like, he's like, bruh, me too. So now what? We're all scared, okay? And he tells him that the most scared he's ever been was the day that Gerard was ordained. And he doesn't really expand on this more in this part, but this really makes Frank think again. This is kind of random time to like talk about this, but one of the things I really praise Bexless for in their writing is how they write Gerard and Mikey's relationship, cuz I feel like some people like give them too much of like a sibling rivalry, or they just write them as if they are best friends, which is true, but they're also best friends who are like brothers for lives and have known each other their whole lives. And I feel like um Bexless really gets the dynamic correct here, okay? And Mikey tells Frank, like, I don't want to go without you, but I will. But he doesn't want to. And Frank's like, you got me, man. Fuck you. Okay, I'll go. And he's like, we're gonna need a van though, and because they're literally like the Scooby Gang now, and we're gonna need a shitload of miracles too. So now it's a whole year later. Now this is like the real like epilogue. Now like the main story's over. Now it's a year later, and now it's a lot like Supernatural or Buffy, and they're basically in like a Monster of the Week episode, if you know you know, and they're like wrapping up a job. It's so Supernatural. I'm sorry, and they're bantering and stuff, and then the Jeffrey Howard guy shows up again with the other like suits once they usually show up at the end of their jobs to like clean up everything, and he's telling them about the next assignment that the Cardinal has for them. And Gerard is like, boys, we're going to Chicago. Epic foreshadowing for the second part. I wonder who's based in Chicago that would be important in a My Chemical Romance fan fiction. Hey, do you see that flag behind me? Oh, hey, do you see that? I wonder who. And basically, this first part of the story kind of just ends with them like driving off into the sunset and towards in the direction of Chicago. Frank is like looking at his wrists. He's looking at these scars that he didn't think were ever going away, and he didn't think the pain that was ever going to go away. But they don't hurt anymore. Mikey is like wordlessly like making a face at him to make sure he's like okay, but of course he's okay, and everyone's just like doing their own thing in the van. And it's really just like they are in real life now. and that's how it ends. That's kind of part 1. That's how it is. That is I have been all things unholy. So, yeah. Now, some of the things I really love about this fan fiction is how it doesn't like give you everything you want right away, and the way it's structured, it might be because this one is based off of an actual movie, but the way it's structured just feels so natural. It feels like how a story should be structured. Like it just makes so much sense. There's a beginning, middle, and end. And I don't know, like it's just so entertaining to read. Like you never would have thought that My Chemical Romance would be in a situation like this, but here they are in this situation. And isn't that incredible? Isn't that incredible to read them in any situation you want? That's the beauty and the power of fan fiction, and that's why I love fan fiction. Okay. So, let me talk to you a little bit about the movie Stigmata. So, the movie itself is from 1999. It's a rated R horror movie. It's not very popular. It has 22% on Rotten Tomatoes and 63% for the audience score, which I mean, that's all. The audience score is not too bad, but the tomato score is not very good at all. But it's basically about this young girl named Frankie. That's right. And she starts to experience signs of stigmata, and she meets this hot middle-aged man priest. He's not actually as young as Gerard is in Unholy Verse, but he's still younger than your average priest. And they kind of do fall in love with one another. But he is really just there to like help her because she is not religious. She like accidentally gets cursed by this like mysterious crucifix that like somebody sends her from like where they're visiting in South America, and then she has to like go to the Vatican and stuff. I'm going to be honest, it wasn't the scenes where she's like receiving the wounds are very interesting, and like it's very cinematic, and she's like like she like flies in the air and stuff, which does not happen to Frank. So it's really interesting, but like the movie itself, like the scenes in between that are kind of boring. Like I don't know, I don't really like I didn't love it, to be honest. But if you liked the horror in Unholy Verse, then you might want to check it out because it is kind of a frightening movie. A lot of religious horror, and I feel like there's not a whole lot of movies that do that. So if that interests you, then I say watch the movie. Um I think it's on Prime. I think you can rent it on Prime. So I feel like a lot of people don't even really care that this movie exists. So that's kind of. Oh, it's also free on Tubi and on YouTube. There you go. You watch it there. Um, I just would love to be like in the room or a fly on the wall when Bexless was watching this movie for some reason and was like, you know what would make this so much better if this was Frank Iero who was suffering, and then just decided to write an entire story based on that. I just would love to know how that happened exactly because it has like there's nothing that connects it to My Chemical Romance. Sometimes you watch a movie or something and maybe there's just like characters who have like you feel like have a similar dynamic to like some characters you like, or you're like, "Oh, there's like brothers in this," and you're like, "I could make this an MCR fan fiction or something." But this movie literally like I feel like there was nothing to connect it to MCR, but somehow Bexless did that, and I applaud it. I love that so much. Now, for the longest time, it was like common knowledge that Bexless pretty much left the internet in 2013. Kind of, I mean, MCR was broken up, like fandom was low key dead, that's how it was. But what some people didn't know is that in 2021, Bexless came back on AO3 and uploaded exactly um one fic, and I did read it. It's only 3,000 words and it's very entertaining actually. Um and then actually this year, at the beginning of this year, Bexless came back again with two fics this time. And one of them is Heated Rivalry, and the other one is MCR and Heated Rivalry. I hate that word. So if that I did not read either of those because honestly I do not care for Heated Rivalry and I do not care for anyone who cares for it. But if that is that not I'm not judging, okay? I'm not judging. If that is your thing, maybe check it out. Just search Bexless on AO3 and tell me how it is, okay? Tell me what it's like. I just think it's so magical that after all these years, Bexless is still into MCR and is still willing to like write for MCR. That's kind of beautiful, okay? So now that I've told you about I have been all things unholy and I've told you everything that's happened in it and why I love it so much and why it's particularly iconic to the MCR fandom just because of how well thought out and well written it is and also because Gerard's a hot priest and we all love that. And I've told you about the movie. I also did some further research that I just wanted to tell you about. So I have two other books here. One book about Saint Gerard and one book about Saint Francis of Assisi. So let me just tell you about some of the interesting things I read about both of these characters during my research. So let's start with Saint Gerard. So the first thing to kind of know is that even like since he was a very young boy, Saint Gerard had a devotion to all of the saints, and this is before Gerard himself was a saint, obviously, and all of the angels, but particularly to Saint Michael. Uh that's it. Oh, what? That's like his brother. So besides the 12 apostles, he would also daily honor his guardian angel, Saint Joseph, Saint John the Baptist, Saint Bernard, Saint Philip Neri, Saint Mary Magdalene, Saint Francis Xavier, Saint Teresa, Saint Francis of Assisi, what? And a few other things. It doesn't really matter, but it's just kind of interesting there, you know? Like maybe they're always meant to find each other. Maybe it was always meant to be. And it's so interesting that Bexus brought up the saints multiple times in the story. And it also talks about how Saint Gerard was a very charitable person. He is very kind. He was always helping the sick and stuff, and he was even charitable towards people that would be considered the enemy. Just all around very nice person. And I also read about how Gerard had a powerful attraction and fascination for a crucified life, which would explain why he was so fascinated with St. Francis of Assisi, because as we learned in the story, he was the first person to ever receive the stigmata. So, speaking of which, let's talk about him now. So, one of the first things I learned here is that the name Francis has a connection to the meaning of someone who has an outspoken and a noble heart, which makes a lot of sense to me. And also, one of the things that we learn about him is that in his early life, he was quite the sinner. He had some sins as a youth, but he got his life turned around pretty clearly, you know. And he was asked a few times in his life. People, thought that he would want to take a wife. Makes sense because that's what people did back then. They're like, Francis, do you wish to get married? And Francis would answer saying, I shall take a more noble and beautiful spouse than you have ever seen. She will surpass all others in beauty and will excel all others in wisdom. But according to an interpretation of like what he was really saying, he was not speaking of a real bride. He was speaking of life in order. So he really wasn't planning on getting married. He just wanted to have a beautiful life and be like, take that world, beautiful life, beautiful wife. So then when we get into his later life, we learn about his experience with the stigmata. So he was on a journey for a 40-day fast when, yes, believe it or not, after, starving himself, this is when he got a vision from an angel. Not saying I don't believe it, but this angel, Seraph, a six-winged angel, go ahead and gives him this weird vision, and then he awakens from the vision. He is left with wounds on his hands and his feet, and even on his side where the spear would have pierced Jesus. Now, this was considered like an honor to him and was also considered like a miracle and like absolute proof of like God's being, which not saying it isn't, but no one else was around when that happened, okay? It's his word. So, and like I kind of mentioned earlier, we also learned that Francis was very lonely in his life. He really did not have anyone. He preferred to work alone. He was in all ways considered a hermit, which is just interesting to me. I don't know. I feel like I learned a lot about these characters, and I think it's really interesting how Bexless wanted to connect the saints to Frank and Gerard in the story. And what's funny is that Gerard actually was named after Saint Gerard, and Mikey was named after Saint Michael. Frank was obviously just named after his dad, who was also named Frank Iero, um, who was named after his dad, named Frank Iero. But I just think it's so fascinating how you can take that kind of imagery and turn it into their characters and influence how their characters act as well. Um, really, you could it's an inspiration for a lot of kind of original characters you could use. Um, Obviously, Frank and Gerard aren't original characters; they're real people, but that is what happens when you write RPF. You kind of have to get creative because guess what? You don't know them in real life, so you can kind of do what you want. Okay. So that is kind of it. That's everything I feel like I have to say about I have been all things unholy. All around, so iconic in the MCR fan base, so iconic, I feel like, in terms of all kinds of real person fan fiction because there's just really nothing like it. No one is writing a fan fiction like this anymore. No one is like, well, that's not true. Not no one. I have read other fan fictions by MCR writers who are seriously like out here like writing novels, and sometimes they are horror novels, and I think we need to do that more because listen, like, yeah, the smut is great. Okay, that's great. But we want to read interesting plots too. Like, you can have more than one thing. You can have your cake and eat it too. And I know there wasn't really any smut in this part of Unholyverse, but I'm telling you, you can have it all. Okay? So that's really why I wanted to make this video is because I want more things like this. I want people to be able to experience modern day equivalents of Unholyverse. Because while we can always have Unholyverse to look back on and appreciate, we need new versions too. I feel like we can't just keep reading the same thing over and over. Okay. So, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and I will put some of my favorite fan fictions that are more modern that kind of follow in the same vein as Unholyverse. And I hope you'll check them out. Shout out to all the authors who shout out to every fanfiction author right now, actually. That's me included. I write fanfiction too. I shout out to everyone because you're literally doing this for fun, for free, for people to read on the internet just because. And I love that so much. And it's such a beautiful creation. And I never want that to be taken away from us. Okay. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll stick around for. I have more video ideas planned. I hope you had a good time. And go ahead and leave some feedback for me in the comments if you feel like you need to. If you really like this video and you want to tell me, like, I'd really appreciate that. If you hated the video and you think I should die, go ahead and tell me that too because I appreciate all forms of feedback. And I like I said, I'm new to this style of video, so I really don't know what I'm doing. So I would really appreciate any kind of feedback. So thank you so much and have a wonderful day.